Motivational speech in the style of Carl Jung, without mentioning him in the beginning, the human being is not born into individuality, but into a web of collective stories. The family, the tribe, the nation, the media, all whisper their expectations before we learn the language of our own soul. From infancy, we are wrapped in layers not of our choosing, names, beliefs, ideals, roles. We are taught how to behave, how to please, how to be seen. And so, before we can walk, we are already wandering far from ourselves. The collective speaks in shoulds and musts, in trends and applause. It lures us with the illusion of belonging, while demanding that we abandon the mystery of who we truly are. The ego, desperate for affirmation, conforms. It becomes a mirror to society's gaze, molding itself into what is admired, not what is authentic. We scroll, we compare, we perform. We absorb the moods of others, the dramas of strangers, the relentless pull of collective thought. The noise grows louder. It clutters the inner world. It suffocates the delicate signals of intuition. And yet, this noise is so constant, so normalized, that we mistake it for reality itself. But deep within, something rebels. A subtle unease, a question half-formed, a fatigue that sleep cannot cure. This is the soul's protest, the quiet resistance of the authentic self, buried beneath years of performance. The psyche grows restless under the weight of the false persona. It begins to whisper, not in shouts, but in dreams, in longings, in sudden revulsions toward things that once felt familiar. And then comes the call, not always dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as a withdrawal of energy. A desire to be alone, a turning away from the noise not out of arrogance, but out of necessity. One no longer wishes to be watched, to be validated, to be liked. One wishes instead to be real. To withdraw from the collective is not to reject humanity, but to recover one's humanity. It is to unplug from the borrowed thoughts that cloud perception. It is to descend from the stage and sit quietly in the dark, listening, not to the audience, but to the silence within. Silence, however, is not empty. It is alive. It is the threshold, and only through silence can we begin to hear the voice that has always been ours, waiting beneath the noise. It is in this withdrawal that we rediscover the sacred act of being. Not doing for others, not becoming for praise, just being, raw, flawed, whole, and in that being, something ancient begins to awaken. When the individual withdraws from the noise of the collective, they do not immediately step into peace. They step into a void. What was once drowned out by distraction now begins to rise. In the absence of external validation, in the hollow, doubt space left by roles and performances, a presence stirs. It is not the divine light that first arrives, but the shadows we have long avoided. What emerges is chaos, not chaos as disorder, but chaos as unmet self, the accumulated weight of unlived emotions, disowned memories, forgotten desires, and the many masks we wore to survive. This is not a gentle homecoming. This is a psychic reckoning. The inner world, ungoverned for so long, rises up in revolt. The body remembers what the mind refused to feel. The nervous system tightens. The chest carries a storm. The dreams become wild, prophetic, or terrifying. One no longer knows who they are, and yet, for the first time, senses that the previous identity was never truly theirs. Here begins the descent, a journey not downward into despair, but inward into the raw underworld of the psyche. This is the terrain of the shadow, those aspects of the self we deemed unworthy, dangerous, shameful. The anger we swallowed to be accepted, the sexuality we repressed to be pure, the grief we silenced to stay strong. These fragments of the soul do not disappear. They wait, hidden in the dark, distorting the personality until they are acknowledged. To focus on oneself, then, is to risk the shattering of the old self-image. It is to gaze into the inner abyss without the armor of distraction. It is to stand at the threshold of one's own unconscious and say, "I will not turn away." The confrontation is not logical, it is mythic. The psyche speaks not in reason but in archetypes. The monster at the gate, the wounded child, the inner tyrant, these are not just metaphors but living psychic forces, and until we face them, they rule us from the shadows. One may feel as if they are falling apart. In truth, they are falling inward, into the basement of the soul where forgotten truths lie buried. Every ache, every fear, every rage that was never voiced now demands its place in the light. This is not madness, it is awakening. The ego screams, but the deeper self listens. The path is narrow. Temptations arise to numb, to run, to return to the old identities. But each time we resist the urge to escape, each time we choose to stay with the discomfort, we reclaim a piece of ourselves that was once exiled. And so the confrontation deepens, not with enemies, but with the unloved parts of our being. The more we allow them to speak, the more we realize they were never meant to destroy us. They were waiting to be healed, to be integrated, to be brought back into the circle of the self. After the descent into the inner chaos, after one has looked into the eyes of the fragmented self, the unloved self, the denied self, there arises a sacred task, not to conquer, not to erase, but to integrate. The soul does not seek perfection, it seeks wholeness. To integrate is to bring the opposites together, conscious and unconscious, light and dark, masculine and feminine, order and instinct, not as adversaries, but as twin forces of one evolving psyche. This is the alchemical process of individuation, where every shattered piece of the self finds its rightful place within the inner cosmos. But we are not taught this. We are taught to split. We are taught to show only what is acceptable, to hide the rest in the basement of our being. Strength without softness, success without doubt, goodness without rage. The world praises the curated self and punishes the full self. But what is suppressed does not vanish. It returns in projections, in triggers, in the faces of those we judge, in the patterns we repeat. To integrate is to see clearly, to realize that what we hate in others often lives in us, that what we reject in ourselves is precisely what we must reclaim. The shadow is not evil, it is misunderstood. The shadow is not our ruin, it is our teacher. Each time we acknowledge a rejected part of ourselves, our jealousy, our fear, our lust, our shame, we loosen the grip of the unconscious. We bring light not to destroy the dark, but to meet it, to hold it, to ask it what it needs. And in doing so, we change not just how we feel, but who we are. The light, too, must be integrated, not as superiority, not as ego inflation, but as responsibility. The gifts we carry, our creativity, our intuition, our compassion, have been dimmed by a world that fears depth. But to know our shadow is to stop fearing our own light. We stop dimming ourselves for the comfort of others. We stop apologizing for our vision, our voice, our power. Integration is messy. It is not a straight line. One day we are the healer, the next the wounded. One day we are sovereign, the next we fall back into the old wound. But each spiral, each repetition, is a deeper invitation into wholeness. And with each descent and return, something hard and egoic softens, and something ancient and rooted takes its place. This is not about balance, it is about union. To integrate shadow and light is to live from the center, not pulled between extremes, not repressing one side in favor of the other, but embodying both with awareness. The warrior and the monk, the lover and the loner, the fire and the water. This is not contradiction. This is completeness. And as we gather the lost pieces of ourselves, we begin to see life differently, not as a battlefield of right and wrong, but as a mirror. every relationship becomes a reflection of our inner dynamic. Every conflict a revelation, every trigger a chance to retrieve what was once exiled. This is not psychology alone. It is soul work. It is the recovery of dignity from fragmentation, the return of authenticity after years of adaptation. And in this return, a deep inner silence begins to grow, not emptiness, but stillness, a kind of groundedness that cannot be faked or shaken, a knowing that the self is not a part to be improved, but a totality to be remembered. There comes a moment, quiet yet undeniable, when the inner work begins to coalesce. After the withdrawal from the collective noise, after the descent into inner chaos, after the long and aching integration of the fractured soul, something subtle yet profound begins to occur. The center, once externalized in others, teachers, parents, systems, ideals, begins to return inward. You are no longer orbiting someone else's sun. Instead, you begin to stand at the center of your own psychic mandala, the living symbol of wholeness, of inner harmony, of sacred totality. The mandala is not merely a geometric figure. It is an ancient image of the self fully realized, where opposites do not cancel each other out, but dance in rhythm, where complexity is not chaos, but unity in motion. To become the center of your own mandala is not an act of ego. It is an act of reverence, not control, but coherence. You begin to see that everything you chased in the world, power, praise, perfection, was a projection of your own lost essence. All the roles you played were attempts to approximate what could only be found at the source. Within, now, something shifts. You stop outsourcing your meaning. You stop asking others for permission to exist. You stop editing your truth for mass approval. You begin to live as if your center matters, because it does. You begin to live as if your soul is the axis around which your reality unfolds. And what unfolds is not loud. It does not scream for recognition. It radiates like a hidden spring beneath a forest floor, quiet, deep, and alive. The more you return to your own center, the more your life becomes a reflection of that inner alignment. The friendships that once fed your false self begin to dissolve. The ambitions born from wounding lose their seduction. The habits that numbed your emptiness fall away, not by force, but by irrelevance. And in their place arises a new kind of doing, not frantic, not performative, but born of stillness. You act not to be seen, but because your center overflows into action. You speak not to impress, but because silence has ripened into word. The outer world no longer dictates your inner state. You remain rooted even when storms arrive. You remain fluid even when form collapses. This center is not static. It is alive. It breathes with the rhythms of the cosmos. It is not made of certainty but of trust. It does not resist change. It holds change. To live from this center is to live symbolically. Every moment becomes a sign, every encounter a message, every pattern a teaching. Life is no longer linear. It is cyclical, spiral, sacred. You begin to see your journey not as a series of events, but as a tapestry of meaning woven by the hands of your own unconscious. And the mandala within reflects the cosmos without. The soul and the world no longer feel separate. You are not a fragment floating in space. You are a microcosm of the great pattern, a living fractal of meaning, and so you walk, not behind anyone, not ahead of anyone, but beside your own soul. Each step returning you again and again to that still point at the center, each breath reminding you that you are already home, not in a place, but in a presence, and this presence does not need to be explained. It only needs to be lived.